Developing civilizations had unforeseen events that could devastate progress, with climate change and pandemics at the top of the list. Climate changes included drought or flooding, exceptionally warm or cold periods. Contagious diseases could travel across trade routes to kill thousands at a time. That ignores the ever present danger of war and uprisings, but these were often related to Mother Nature's merciless events. Climate change can be beneficial, at least for some. Hot weather and drought in the formerly green Sahara created a desert but made Europe and much of the Middle East habitable. Favorable climate happened at various times across the world, which caused the growth of budding civilizations for some period of time. Granted, it was often for a relatively short period, followed by chaotic events, a common occurrence in medieval Europe. There were horrendous plagues that changed history. The first known one was the Babylonian flu epidemic around 1200 BCE. The plague of Athens in 429 BCE killed close to 100,000 people, including Pericles, and a factor resulting in losing to Sparta. Climate change could be related to plagues, since poor climate often led to starvation and migrations. The ancient world experienced the rise of the Roman and Chinese empires, which included trade between them across the Silk Road. Rome sent armies to conquer much of the East, and the army became a likely carrier of plagues. The Antonine Plague in the 2nd century, during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, was probably smallpox and killed 5 to 10 million. Lesser plagues also were recorded, including the plague of Cyprian in the 3rd century. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Byzantium, continued for another 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. Poor health and sanitation continued, resulting in disease, including plagues. The most destructive was the plague of Justinian in the 540s, probably caused by bubonic plague. It probably came by infected rats on grain ships from Egypt and spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, possibly killing 10 million. It was first mentioned in China by 610. Recent research indicates that these major plagues happened during cooler, drier periods, suggesting the significance of cold weather as a key factor in disease. Climate stress meant food shortages, increased rodents and migrations, resulting in greater disease susceptibility. Hygiene and sanitation were not priorities in the Middle Ages, and contagious diseases happened with regularity. Food production tended to be marginal, with poor harvest a common occurrence, made worse by climate change like floods, droughts, and cold weather. Lords often demanded their expected payments, leaving peasants below subsistence and vulnerable to both starvation and disease. Cities could be smelly slime pits with the ever-present danger of fire, disease, and frequent plagues. Plagues were especially common in cities with people packed together by the thousands. They depended on trade, meaning merchant vessels, possibly carrying infected rats, were essential for most cities, dramatically increasing the likelihood of plague. 14th century Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio wrote the Decameron based on fleeing Florence because of Black Death. The 14th century in Europe was bad even by the standards of the Middle Ages. Multiple calamities included floods and famine of 1315 to 17 with starvation accompanied by typhoid. The Black Death, bubonic plague, hit across Europe from 1346 to 1353, killing 25 to 50 million, perhaps half the population. The system was in crisis with continuous farming and grain production collapsing. There was a shift to sheep production, which required less manpower. The plague returned throughout the 14th through 17th centuries in Europe with the claim that the plague was somewhere in Europe every year from 1346 to 1671. It was not just Europe, but it plagued the Islamic world as well, especially between 1500 and 1850. Samuel Pepys was British Secretary of the Admiralty, but most known for the diary he kept throughout the 1660s. He described the Great Plague of London of 1665, claiming the streets were empty of people and he chewed tobacco to protect himself. Plague was not unusual, having hit London in 1592, 1603, and 1636, aided by people living in cramped housing, in poor health, and lack of sanitation. Just to add to the misery, Pepys wrote about the Great Fire of 1666, noting people jumping into boats or flinging themselves into the Thames. Why stop at just pandemics and climate change? Time and again, mass production and prosperity led to chaos and collapse. Next time on Food History and Mystery.